Recording started. All right, good evening, everybody. We are now Parshas Vayechi, which is the 12th of the portions in 12th and last portion of Parshas Vayechi. There are 85 verses in this week's Parsha. There are 1,154 words and 4,448 letters in this week's Parsha. There are no biblical performative commandments or prohibitive commandments from this week's Parsha. And next week we begin the book of Exodus, and we'll already start seeing not in the portion of Exodus, but 2-3 portions in, you'll start seeing mitzvah after mitzvah after mitzvah after mitzvah. We'll see, because we got to get all the way up to 613. Right now we have 3. Yeah. So far. So so we'll see many of those. But this week's Parsha is a really fundamental Parsha, where I think everyone needs to learn this week's Parsha, read it inside and study it. Very interesting that Parshas Vayechi does not have a separation as other Parshas have with the previous portion. So Parshas Vayechi begins with a separation of one letter from the previous portion. Usually you'll have at least, I think it's 12-letter space between portion and portion, but not between Vayigash and Vayechi. Why not? So there are many reasons given, but I want to share with you one. You see, when Moshe was writing the Torah, as God dictated it, God said, Bereshit, Bara, right? And Moshe wrote exactly every letter, every word exactly, with the Yud, without a Yud, with a Vav, without a Vav. Every single letter of the Torah is exact and precise. And what Moshe did is, between each portion, Moshe needed to think, stop, contemplate, and just process everything that just happened. But what happened in last week's Torah portion? The Jewish people go down to Egypt. What's going to happen in Egypt? The Jews are going to have a very miserable time. What's there to think about? What's there to contemplate? The only way the Jewish people will get out of that is with faith in Hashem. When the Jewish people have belief and knowledge that only Hashem can save them from this situation, that's the only thing we really need. That's the only thing we really have. And that's why Moshe didn't even stop to think. For this, we only need faith. We only need emunah. Let's move on. There's nothing to think about. And many times in our lives, we're in a scramble, and we're trying to figure out what's going to... Sometimes there's nothing to think. Just let Hashem do his thing. And that we learn from Moshe here. We get into a situation like, what's going to be? Right? How many such situations do we have in our lives? Probably hundreds, maybe thousands. And we see every time it worked out. And if we want to be ridiculous, we can say, well, it only worked out because that person backed out, or this situation, or that situation, and not realize this is Hashem making it unfold exactly the way it needs to. Right, Dave? There we go. Okay, so Yaakov makes Yosef swear that he will be buried in Eretz Yisrael. Joseph is the viceroy of Egypt. He's in charge of everything. He has the ability to make such a promise. And Yaakov, because he could have asked all of his other children to make that promise. No. He asked Yosef specifically, to swear that he'll be buried in Eretz Yisrael. And we see that one of the reasons that Yaakov wanted to be buried in the land of Israel is because of the plagues that were going to hit Egypt. And he didn't want to be part of it. Egypt will be filled with lice, and he will be made into an idol, and all idols were going to be destroyed, and he wanted to be first at Tchias HaMesim. Tchias HaMesim is the resurrection. The resurrection is a very important thing. I learned this when I was probably in second grade. All right, in second grade, that there will come a time where God resurrects the dead. 2 important pieces. Those who are buried in the land of Israel are resurrected first. Those who are outside the land of Israel, the Midrash says that there are going to be tunnels where all of the bodies will roll all the way to Israel. And then they will be resurrected in Israel. But there's another very important thing. I got a phone call yesterday morning about someone who was cremated, and they want to know if they can bury the ashes in a cemetery. So there's a problem. The problem is that it's a terrible thing for the soul if the body is cremated. It's a terrible thing for the soul, especially if it's done willingly. If the person who passes away says, yes, I want to be cremated. I actually have someone I learn with on a regular basis, and it was one of the discussion we've had numerous times about not being cremated. And he's insistent that he likes fire and he likes heat and he wants to be cremated. I told him I think it's a huge mistake for his own soul, for his own neshama, right? For the resurrection, where the soul and the body are reunited, that the sort of the vessel won't be there.
What about people that were cremated during the Holocaust?
In the Holocaust, right? So those are done unwillingly.
Right.
Those are done unwillingly, and it could be that that's why there's a challenge in our generation with cremation. Why people are so much struggling with it. Because think of it like this: we're most likely a reincarnation of somebody. And they say that most of us are probably reincarnations of people who perished in the Holocaust. So it could be, let's just think for a second. Is it possible that maybe God says, you know what? Over there you were cremated against your will. Here you're going to have a choice now. And now you're going to have to demonstrate what your choice really is. And maybe that's why that's the struggle in this generation. It really is a big struggle because you have all of these environmentalists who lyingly, it's not true, that it's better for the environment. It's not true. The amount of emissions that come from a crematorium is like 1,000,000 times worse, than burial. Burial is like the greenest of green things you can possibly imagine. Okay. Either way, that's a very side note, but it's, if you know anyone who plans to be cremated, persuade them not to. There's actually a couple of books here that we have in our magnificent library. One is The Afterlife and the Path of the Afterlife. Okay, these are both fantastic books that talk about the afterlife, and part of it is also about the burial process. I highly recommend it. These two books are magnificent. And the other is here. Look at that. Cremation or Burial. All right, we have two copies of it. So if you want to learn with the study partner, you can learn about it with your study partner. But this goes into great depth about it. Okay? I like to promise and deliver, like right away. So there we go. Told you there's a book, right? Okay, Yaakov was first to have illness. Why did he want illness? Yaakov prayed for illness. No, it's a prophecy. Of course, it's a prophecy. You're right, because we've discussed that many times. That pain and suffering is a prophecy, but there's something more than that. More to that.
He wanted to know when he was going to die.
He wanted to know when he was going to die. He wanted to have a warning, a notice that he was going to die. And here he had a notice. He was ill, and this was his notice that he was going to die. Now, it was just a side note. How did people die beforehand? People just sneezed and they died, which is why when we hear someone sneeze, we say, "So gesund," right? Or Gesundheit, or many other things that people say, but meaning to good health, because it used to once be that this was the end, this is when you check out. And now it's no longer that, but we want it to still be a blessing. Okay, so we see that, Jacob got notice of his impending death with illness. So I know we sometimes, I'll dedicate tonight's class actually to my great uncle, Rabbi Yidl Shpira. Rabbi Yidl Shpira was a very, very holy, righteous Jew. And the truth is, if I thought about this earlier, I would have this prepared on presentation here. But I'll show you a picture of how holy this man was. This man was a survivor. He's my grandfather's brother, my mother's father's brother. And when my grandfather saw him in Auschwitz, when they met up in Auschwitz, my grandfather said about him that he was skin and bones. Skin and bones. You can hardly recognize him. And he carried him on his back. My grandfather carried him on his back through wherever they went. He carried him on his back from place to place. He passed away just yesterday at 97 years old. And I want you to see the most incredible picture of him putting on tefillin. And he wraps the strap right on top of his numbers. It's like it hits your ear. I'll show you here. See that? See the numbers? He's wrapping his straps every single day on top of those numbers. What's going to make a bigger impression? What's going to make a bigger impact? The numbers? Here, look at that. The numbers on his arm or the tefillin that unbelievable. So I asked my mother, I said, I never saw my grandfather's, his older brother, I never saw my grandfather's numbers. So my mother said that my grandfather never got the numbers on his arm because they were planning to liquidate them. I was like, why waste time tattooing their arms with numbers when we're just throwing them into the crematory? There's no need for numbers. Who needs the numbers? That was, you understand, to the degree that. Oy.
So your grandfather never got tattooed.
Correct.
How to get out?
How did he get out? So he ended up going to the labor camp, and in the labor camp, he got busy working, so they didn't kill him. And it's the miracles. I was in Auschwitz. I went to Auschwitz. I went to Birkenau. I went to see those terrible, terrible places. It's unfathomable. You cannot, if you haven't been there, you can't. It was a death factory.
Yeah.
That's what it was.
Yeah, I don't know that I could do it.
You get so.
It's really hard. I mean, as much as I talk with our guide, I was completely speechless the whole time we were in Auschwitz. And we're talking about 2 hours.
Right.
My daughters look at me, I couldn't say a word. It was just one of the roughest places I've ever seen.
And when you see the room of hair, and you see the room of shoes, and you see the room of clothes, and you see it just like the hair. Yeah, yes,
That's what he's first said. You just didn't understand.
I didn't.
Hair.
I'm not sure what he was talking about, so I just sort of skipped over that.
Right. Okay, so now let's talk about blessing. So Yaakov blesses Ephraim and Manasseh. That's the first of the two. You bless Ephraim and Manasseh. Now, very interesting that we bless our children. If you look at the verse in the Torah, it says, "B'cha yivorach Yisrael." By you shall the Jewish people be blessed. And that is in Genesis. If you're looking in your own Chumash, it says a very interesting thing. Here we go. Chapter 48, verse 20. Howard, do you have that? Yeah? Okay, chapter 48, verse 20. So he blessed them that day, saying, by you shall Israel invoke blessing. Lamor, saying, Yisimcha Elohim ke Ephraim v'che Manasseh. May God make you like Ephraim and like Manasseh. By Yosem es Ephraim l'fnei Manasseh, and he put Ephraim before Manasseh. But it's an amazing thing that when we bless our children, that's what we say. Yisimcha Elokim k'Ephraim v'Manasseh. God should bless you like Ephraim and Manasseh. So a couple of very important things. First is, why Ephraim and Manasseh? Why are they the example of who we should bless our children by? Secondly, is we know that there's a different blessing that's recited for the girls, different than the boys. We don't say Simcha Lakim K'Ephraim Manasseh. You say Simcha Lakim Kisor Rivka Rachav Leah, like Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. But the Torah specifically says, B'cha Yivorach Yisrael, you should bless the Jewish people by you, by Ephraim and Manasseh. So I asked my rabbi about this. This is not a halachic ruling to anybody, but this was what he guided me to do, because I told him I was conflicted with this. If this is how you're supposed to bless your children, that's your boys and your girls. So what I do is I bless my children, even the girls, right? God should bless you like Ephraim and Manasseh, and like Sarah, Rivka, Rachav Leah. Right? The Torah commands here. It's not a commandment of like a mitzvah, performative commandment, but the Torah is teaching us to bless our children like that they should be like Ephraim and Manasseh. But what was so great about Ephraim and Manasseh? What was so great about Ephraim and Manasseh that specifically we want our children to be like them? Where did Ephraim and Manasseh, where were they born? In Egypt. Where did they grow up? In Egypt. Where did they live? In Egypt. They went to Jewish day school, right? They went to Beth Yeshurun day school. They went to Schlenker. Where did they go? They didn't go to any Jewish day school. But yet, notwithstanding that they didn't have a Jewish influence, they didn't have a Jewish environment, they maintained their Judaism. They maintained their status. And God understood in the Torah, they're going to be in 3,300 years from now, right? When the Torah was written, right? They're going to be people living in Houston, where their kids are going to be going to Westbury High and to Sharpstown Middle School. And they're going to be going to Bel Air High School, or to wherever it is that they go, to Kincaid or wherever, St. John's, Episcopal, HSPVA, well, you name it. And they're not going to have necessarily a Jewish environment. God should make you like Ephraim and Manasseh, that notwithstanding where they grew up, notwithstanding their influence, they stayed loyal to the Torah. They stayed committed to the Torah. They stayed part of the tribes of Israel, notwithstanding that they grew up out of the. So for someone says, listen, for my job, I had to move to New Mexico. I don't have a shul. I don't have a mini in New Mexico. God should bless you, that you should grow and be firm in your Judaism, to be firm in your relationship with Hashem, just like Ephraim and Manasseh were. Okay.
Rabbi.
Yes, sir.
Don't you think that don't you think because Joseph was driven to be more Jewish in Egyptian lands, that his children were just like him? And who did Joseph learn from? His father?
Correct, but still, don't forget that 22 years Joseph was away from his father. That's a long period of time to be away and to always keep the presence of mind. My grandfather said when he went to Sweden, he was in Sweden for 9 years during the Holocaust and after the Holocaust. He said every single person he knew that came there religious left non-religious. 9 years takes a toll. You have negative influences. You have my grandfather, the first thing he did when he was in Sweden, he put a sign on his door to his house, which said Beit HaMusar, the house of Musar. And every day he studied Musar. He says that that's what maintained his Judaism. Because that kept his relationship with God fresh every single day. David.
What does that mean when you say growing up Jewish? What does that mean?
Oh, so firstly is to understand that you live in a world where God is present. Right? It's very easy. We see this in every day, right? We can be in a world where we think, Ascentium Capital, can I take your next financing, right? Next one, look, I'm good. Look at me. I'm David Marvin. I keep pumping out those sales. All right, the Hoffer Furniture. People I I just make it happen, right? Or we can stop and we can say, you know what? Thank you, Hashem. You make it happen. I'm just a vessel through which it'll. You understand? It's very easy for someone to get all, and we've all met people who've made it really, really big financially, and they talk like they are the smartest people since sliced bread, right? What did they do? They were in the right place at the right time, maybe, right? We have to recognize it's very easy for us to take credit for things that are not really our accomplishments. And that's what the Torah is reminding us here. Remember every day. Exactly. But humility doesn't only mean that I put myself down. That's not what it means. It means putting Hashem first and recognizing that I can't do a thing. You know, I told you earlier in the first segment of tonight's class, I took my children to the doctor. As you know, I have been heavily involved in the medical arena through Hatzalah over the past 2 years, and so I know a lot more about the human body than I knew before. I still don't know anything compared to. I mean, it's like the brilliance of the human body, how resilient it is, and how it's just unbelievable. So the doctor was listening to my little daughter, 4 years old, listening to her lungs, listening to her heart, listening to her. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. And we can't for 1 second, not for a second, take for granted that we have a heartbeat. Because you know what happens if that heartbeat stopped, even for a second? You know what? Your heart says, I'm just taking a little coffee break. A little coffee break. Just a little break. I'll be back in 5 minutes. Right? Give me a little break. Since the day you came to this world, since the minute, right? 40 days after conception, that heart has been pumping and not stopping. And you know what happens, God forbid, if for 5 minutes it took a coffee break? We'd be done. 5 minutes, that's it. Even less than 5 minutes. The body can't survive. And the heart keeps pumping, pumping, and pumping, and pumping every second, pumping again. It's the most miraculous thing to never stop realizing, never ever stop realizing the miracles we live every single day. That's humility. When we realize that everything is a gift. The fact that God gives us another lease on life. You know what the greatest day of your life is? Today. Today's the greatest day of your life because you're here today. Oh, tomorrow. Who says you have tomorrow? We take it for granted, I think. You know, it's like in 6 months, I'm going on vacation. In 6 months, you might be elsewhere. Right? We have to take it into a realization that it really is a gift every day that we have. And every success that we have could not happen without that heartbeat, without those lungs that operate, without a digestive system, without the liver, without the spleen, and without the everything. Okay, so now we have as follows Yaakov's final parting words. Reuven, he acts too quickly. He can't be a Kohen. He can't be a king. No double portion for him, right? He acts too quickly. He doesn't think it through. Shimon and Levi cause problems, right? We see it regarding Shechem and Yosef. Shimon will settle in the middle of Yehuda's territory, and Levi will won't inherit land at all. Instead, Levi will be teachers and live scattered about Israel. Yehuda, lion cub, to be lion king. Leadership qualities, right? The sale of Yosef, Benjamin's prison exchange. First in marching in the desert and battles in Canaan. Nachshon ben Aminadav, who put his body into the Yam Suf, into the sea when they split for the Jewish people. Nachshon was a descendant of Yehuda. He's a leader. He goes in and went till his nostrils. You remember that?
Yep.
Remember that, right? He went into the water because Moshe said it's going to split. He just went right in till the water got to his nostrils, and then the water split. Nachshon, right? Bitzalel, the architect of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle, the head of the Nisim, the first judge Asniel ben Kenaz, also a descendant of Judah. King David and Mashiach. Also, Yaakov blesses Yehuda's mountainous land with vines and succulent red grapes, fields filled with grains and pasture crowded with sheep. Zevulun, merchants by the sea, and will partner with Yisachar in their Torah. Right? What does Yisachar do? Yisachar learns Torah, and many will serve on Sanhedrin. Right? Because when they become great Torah scholars, what's going to happen? They're going to be leaders in Torah knowledge and Torah wisdom, and they're going to serve on the court of the Sanhedrin. Dan is sly like a snake and protects Klal Yisrael from behind. Judah was at the beginning of the Jewish people's journey. Dan was in the back, right? And he used the slyness that he had, the gift that he had of, I guess you can say, sly could be good and bad, but he used it for the good to protect the Jewish people. Shimshon will be a descendant. Samson will be a descendant who uses cunning tactics to protect the Jewish people. Gad, a strong fighter, and will receive the land of Jordan. You remember that they received. We'll see in a second. Asher, many olives, and their oils will light the menorah. Naphtali, dough. Their crops will grow fast and they will run fast as well. Yosef, Ephraim, and Manasseh are the double portion from Yaakov. And Binyamin, strong like a wolf, the Beis Hamikdash will be in his portion. The wolf catches and runs. King Shaul ruled very briefly. He was the descendant of Binyamin. But also, Binyamin was the only one that was not involved in the sale of Joseph. Jerusalem can only be in a land of peace. God's presence can only be in the land of peace. Because he was not involved in the strife with Yosef, the temple was in Binyamin's land. Okay, the temple will be built in Binyamin's land because that's the only place, right? It says, it's called Mishkan Shalem, the temple, the tabernacle of peace.
Where is his space?
Jerusalem. Temple Mount is Benjamin. So now it's a very important thing. You see, Shimon, everyone gets a blessing. Jacob identifies their character and then gives them a blessing, except for two people. We say this every year, and it's important re-mentioning it every year. Shimon and Levi are the only two that do not get a blessing. They get lambasted, they get ridiculed, they get criticized. They're on the chopping block. It's crazy, right? Where's their blessing? So there are two ways that you can bless someone. Number one is you can give them a blessing. I can say, David, you should be successful in your business. Okay. Now, does that mean that you'll be successful? Doesn't mean that you will. But basically what I'm doing is I'm putting a goodwill up before God, and hopefully God gives it a stamp of approval. Got it. Approved. But that's not up to us. That's up to the Almighty. Hashem decides whether or not we get that blessing. But there's another way that you can bless someone, and that is by sharing with them with sincerity, with love. You can share with someone their flaws. You can share with someone their flaws. And that is in their hands, whether or not they can change. If someone told you a flaw that you possessed, you might, if they really, really loved you, they'd probably find a way to say it that won't hurt you. Because no one likes to hear about their flaws. No one likes to hear about how terrible they are in any specific area of life. But if someone really loves you and cares about you, will find a way to say it in a positive, in the best way possible. And then you can grow from it. And you'll cherish that, hopefully. I had recently someone did something to someone else. I was just there. And they said something which was a little bit, more than just a little bit. It was very insensitive. Very insensitive. And I was there with someone else. And after when we walked out, the guy said to me, he said, is this guy crazy? Like, what is he thinking? You know, it's like, this is not the place, not the time. Like, what? I said, yeah, I think it was bad judgment. So a few days later, I called the individual up and I said, I have something I wanted to bring to your attention. Whenever you have some time, well, I just, I'm sure it was an oversight. He says, no, just tell me now. Just tell me now. I'm like, no, but I don't want to, it's like, you know how that works. So he said, I actually have a few minutes now. So I said like this. I said, look, I know that you're a good person. I know that you would never do this intentionally. But this is what you said when we were by so-and-so. He says, I said that? That's terrible. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize. You sure that those are the words I used and those are the things I said? Like, yeah. The other guy who was with me commented to me as well that he thought it was a little bit out of character. And I know that you're just a much better person than the way that sounded. And therefore, I just want to bring it to your attention. I'm sorry. I'm nobody. I'm not a perfect person myself. I'm nobody to criticize you, but I know that you'd want to know about this. I know that you'd care to know that you made this mistake. So that's something which now he can repair. That's something that he can now, and I went over to the individual that he said that to, and I said, I said to him, just by the way, I heard what that individual said, and I spoke to him, and he feels terrible because it's very uncharacteristic of him. This is not who he is, and he really felt terrible. He says, oh, okay, I appreciate it. Like, he felt good. It felt like, it put him at ease. Sometimes people say things, they don't realize what they're saying. They don't realize how it's coming across. They don't realize, not because they're being neglectful of other people's emotions, but because they just don't realize how someone else hears it. And that's sometimes important for us to have someone who loves us and cares about us to give that constructive criticism. Okay. Again, it's not, and I thought about it for those couple of days before I spoke to him. I thought about, like, is this because I'm just angry and I want him to know that, hello, you're a nobody, or do I really care about this person and want him to correct it? You understand? Sometimes we criticize people because I gotta lash out at them because they need to know. I gotta put them in their place. No. This can't be about me. This can't be. And I for a couple of days I let it brew to the point where I felt like, okay, this is really for their benefit. This is really because I care about them, and I want them I want to help. So then Yaakov sadly dies, and we know that Yaakov lost 35 years of his life because he complained. He complained to Pharaoh when Pharaoh asks him, so tell me about your life. So what does Yaakov say? Oh, they were miserable years. They were terrible years. Right? And if you see, Yaakov uses two different terms. He says, the days of my life and the days of my years of my life. I think that those are the two different terminologies. Now, one was when he had prophecy and one when he didn't have prophecy. And what he was complaining about was the years he didn't have prophecy. He was saying, they were pitiful years. But the years he had prophecy, those were great years, because the prophecy means a greater connection to the Almighty. So Jacob lost he said 35 words, I think it was 35 words that he said extra about negative about his life. Took 35 years off his life. Each word was a year. We see the same thing with Joseph. When Joseph was in the prison, and he said 2 words, right? Remember me. Yeah. He tells to the right. He says it to the baker. Remember me.
2 years.
2 years. He sat in prison longer. So that's because the righteous are judged on every microscopic level. Not just on the big scale, the big things, but every single word they say has ramifications, and they're held accountable for it. See, he's buried by Yosef and his brothers in Ma'aras Machpelah, which is the cave of the doubles. Machpelah means the doubles. Who are the doubles? Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Leah, not Rachel. Rachel's in Rachel's tomb. And this here now, Jacob, right? So this is Jacob being buried here. Who else was buried there? They say that Adam and Eve were buried there as well. And
The head of Esau.
the head of Esau, very nice. It says it right here in our notes, right? With Esau's head. What happened? So in this whole balagan, and this whole thing that's going on here with Jacob being buried, Esau comes by and is like, what's going on here? They're like, oh, this is Jacob. He's like, no. I don't think it's Jacob that can be buried here. It's me that's supposed to be buried here. Don't forget, he was the fourth patriarch that was supposed to be. That never happened because he went the wrong path. So he lost his status. But he's like, but still the burial place should be mine. And they get into this whole conversation. Now, Dan, the tribe of Dan, had a son. His name was Hushim. Hushim was deaf. And Hushim had the strength of the house of Jacob. He sees the whole interaction between Esau and the children of Jacob. And he thinks that Esau is just holding them back from burying Yaakov. He pulls out a sword and severs the head of Esau. And the head rolls into the tomb of the doubles. And that's why his head was buried there as well. Once it was in there, it remained in there. That's not something that it was a sign from Hashem that that's where it needed to be. But that's the story that the Midrash relates about Hushim ben Dan, Hushim the son of Dan, and how the head of Esau specifically made it into there. Bnei Yisrael and the Egyptians mourn him, and the famine returns. We know that the famine was removed because of Jacob. It was removed in his merit. But now that he died, the famine was restored. The brothers ask for forgiveness from Yosef, and he reassures them. Why does he reassure them? He wants them to know, I'm not going to take revenge. This is not you. This is Hashem. Again, he was a tzaddik. He was called a tzaddik. Yosef is called a tzaddik. He's the only one other than Noah who's called a tzaddik, a righteous individual. But he reassures them here. And now Yosef dies as well. He ruled Egypt for 54 years and dies at the age of 110. Additionally, by the way, he was supposed to live another 10 years also. He was supposed to live another 10 years. He was supposed to live to 120. But he lost 10 years also. You know why? Because he allowed his father to bow down to him. He allowed him because when he came to see him in Egypt, he bowed down to him. And it's not respectful for your father to bow down to you. And he let him because he knew it was a prophecy, that the prophecy was going to be fulfilled. But he should have, from his standpoint, he should have said, no, Father, you don't bow down to me. By allowing his father to do that, he lost 10 years. And he makes his brothers promise to take his bones back to Eretz Yisrael. Right before he dies, he has his brother's promise. And who fulfilled that promise? No. Who fulfilled it? Who actually went to get the bones of Joseph? Moshe. Moshe, when the Jewish people, during the plague of darkness, were ransacking the Egyptian homes and taking all the spoils and taking their gold and silver, what did Moshe do? Moshe says, you guys keep yourselves busy. I'll be back right away. Right? Where did he go? He went to the Nile River. And he said a special verse, and the bones of Joseph elevated to the top, to the surface of the Nile River.
Is this in the Midrash?
Yes. And Moshe collected the bones of Joseph and brought them, and through the entire travel of the Jewish people in the desert, the bones of Yosef traveled with them. And then when they arrived in Israel, they were buried in the city of Nablus, of Shechem, which was Joseph's city. So then we read the last three words on this page. Chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek. We should strength, more strength, and even more strength. Right? And God willing, next week we'll begin the book of Exodus together. There is now 11 portions in the book of Exodus. There are 12 in Genesis, 11, 10, 10, 11. So 10 in Leviticus, 10 in Numbers, and 11 in Deuteronomy. So, my dear friends, have a terrific evening. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a great evening, everybody.
Amazing
Thank
class.
you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Thank you.